So my name's Kiri Tunks and I'm still a National Officer for the National Education Union, but I've just finished my term as National President, and in fact I started back in the classroom on Monday last week, which I can tell you is a bit of a shock actually, because although I've been teaching for 26 years, I've been out of the classroom for 18 months. And it's amazing how quickly you get used to sort of a slightly more normal way of living, of kind of having sleep and having time to make food and spend time with your family. So it was a complete shock. By Wednesday of last week, I texted my partner and said, I'm absolutely shattered. I really, it's a real shock, and it was a real awakening for me actually. And I think it's really good that active trade unionists don't lose touch with what's happening in the classroom, because how can we actually represent and work for our members if we've kind of forgotten what it's like to be in the classroom or in the school. So I'm also, as I said, a secondary teacher. I've been teaching for 26 years in Tower Hamlets. I haven't really been anywhere else, so that was great as president to be able to go around the country and see what life is like around the country, and it just enforced my understanding that actually education is in absolute crisis for lots of different reasons. Some of the reasons are the same: funding and kind of bad policy, ideological policy, but of course there are regional variations, regional differences. There are differences in wealth and so on. There's differences between urban settings and rural settings, and so it's a very complex picture actually out there. And I should also say that I am the chair of governors at my daughter, well, she's just left actually, but of my daughter's secondary school. So I think I can speak with some confidence when I say to you that education is in crisis, because I'm coming at it from a range of perspectives. I do want to thank the Labour Party. I am a member of the Labour Party. The National Education Union is not affiliated, and we've had discussions about discussing affiliating, and I think the feeling is that the membership isn't in that place. That's not what they want to do, but we have built a very strong relationship with the Labour Party, and we're very pleased with that, because we think it's been a very fruitful exchange. We've been listened to, and frankly that is very unusual. We've had years of not being listened to by the Tories and the Lib Dem coalition and so on, so to have a big political party actually listening to people in education and wanting to try and act and develop things that are going to make things better in education, it's like a life raft actually, I think, to a lot of people out there in schools and colleges. I know the Labour Party is just in the process of producing a report on a policy review, and there's been all sorts of submissions and so on into that from CLPs and other groups, and I know the NEU made a good submission into that, and we are hoping that the policy review will reflect the things that we think education needs to be doing, or what needs to be happening in education. We really welcome the idea of the National Education Service. We're not 100% sure what it is, and I'm not sure Labour is yet, but that's okay as well, because isn't that part of the process that we're discussing and finding out and thinking about what it needs to be? And of course that National Education Service has to go from cradle to grave, as I think as the Labour Party has said. So it's got to not just encompass the early years and the kind of the formal part of education, but also post sixth form, post university, into everybody's lives, so that they can keep renewing and keep kind of educating themselves and developing as people. So we're very pleased that the Labour Party has announced that they want to get rid of the academies. We think that the fragmentation of the education system is a very bad thing. It's done untold damage to our system, and especially I think had an impact on our more vulnerable communities and so on. And we're also very pleased about the commitment to get rid of the testing regime, again because we think the testing regime, apart from the fact that it's not actually telling you what you think it's telling you, it's not actually telling you which are the better schools, it's not actually telling you which are the smarter pupils. Apart from all that, it's skewing what we're doing in schools, so that what we do, we teach to the test just so that we can keep our school out of trouble. And that is a real betrayal of our communities, of our young people, and actually of our economy and our society. So we think it's a very poor model of education, and we're very delighted that the Labour Party wants to do something about it. So I've been asked to talk, I think, mainly about funding, but I'm happy, if there's other things you want to ask me, maybe in the discussion I can respond to that. The funding, the announcement of funding, just out of nowhere. For years the Tories have been saying it's fine. You know, we've given you more money than anybody else has ever given you, and you should be grateful. And you know, you're painting a bad picture. You're lying. They accuse us of lying about the figures. And in fact, our figures have been analysed and tested and kind of checked by all sorts of independent bodies, and they're correct. Our figures, our projections, our figures are perfectly sound. And in the end, the government's had to realise that. So it was a real shock to have a Tory Prime Minister turn around and say, yes, you're right, schools are underfunded. We were like, what? You know. And at first we were like, well, that's great, you know. But of course, then cold light of dawn falls, and you realise actually it's not all that it seems. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good because it says something about how they're frightened of this issue, how they know that they're wrong on it, and that it's a problem on the doorstep and a problem for them at the election. So we think it's a cynical ploy, right? We're happy to take the money. We will take the money because, you know, we are desperate, but it is a cynical ploy. They've only done it because, as I say, education is an Achilles heel for the Tories. At the last election, 850,000 people changed their votes purely on education. That's what the polls tell us. And we weren't expecting that because at the start of the election, education was quite low down the list in terms of what was a priority for people, and it was the combined effort of people in communities everywhere raising the question that pushed it up into the top 4 or 5, I think, by the time election came around. And of course, schools funding is something that everybody can see. We were at the Conservative Party conference because we go to all the conferences, and their activists were coming up to our stall and saying, you're right, funding's really a problem, because they are governors of local small schools. Their children teach or work in schools. They're counsellors. They can see actually the facts on the ground, and they know that actually there's a funding crisis. So we think that the Tories just wanted to shut down the education fund. Look at what they're facing, look at the mess they're facing, and they just made a calculation that this was one front they didn't want to fight, so they thought they'd chuck some money at it. And of course it's easy to say, we'll give you this money, we've got to get elected first, right? And also we know what happens, you get elected and then suddenly, oh well, we haven't quite got the money. So, you know, but it was a good thing to say, and actually it helps us because it means that we're winning the argument. And it is an indication that our campaign has hit hard. And it's not just our campaign. So as the NEU, we are very conscious that we have worked with a wide alliance of people. And that actually, in the end, has been what has enabled us to kind of hit home. So first of all, it's a cynical ploy. Secondly, it's not enough. I mean, you know, we don't want to be ungrateful, and it sounds like a lot of money, but it's frankly not enough because it doesn't make up for the years of underfunding or the increases in costs or the increases in pupil numbers. So actually, it sounds like big money, but really we're not very impressed with it. So, I mean, I'm just going to read some figures here because I think it's important to get these figures out there. We think we've done a calculation with, again, you know, various other groups. We've had it checked. We've made it as robust, this projection, as we can. And we think that by 2022-2023, school budgets need to rise to 12.6 billion. Now, the Tories have promised us 9 billion. So, you know, it's a significant amount, but it's still not enough. We don't think that every school is going to see that rise, and we think it will be probably the poorer schools that don't see that rise, because that seems to have been the pattern actually up until now. They've pledged 400 million for 16 to 19 education. But actually, again, that is not enough. That sector has suffered huge cuts since 2010, something like a 27% real-term funding cut. And if you read anything about what's happening in HE, it's just slashing what used to be a brilliant provision for our young people. So courses have been cut, the workload is very high, people are leaving, the pay is really reduced, the enrichment that people can offer. It really is very, very poor, the conditions in HE. So we think that actually 400 million, thank you very much, but actually that sector needs 1.2 billion pounds. The special educational needs, actually, their provision in this country is an absolute disgrace, frankly. We've got about 8,500 children who are not in full-time educational provision. There's all sorts of reasons for that, off-rolling and stuff, which is a kind of wider educational issue. But it's also to do with schools being unable to, or local authorities being unable to fund the kind of services and support that those young people need. It's also to do with a rise in the number of EHCPs, the plans that people with special needs can get to help them get support that they need. Those have risen, but the funding for them has not risen anywhere near enough. The high needs block, yes, it has gone up, but it hasn't gone up as much as the demand. So actually it's a real terms cut. And we know that local authorities, 93% of local authorities have suffered real terms shortfall in funding for special educational needs. So that's not enough. And then they're saying that they're delivering a certain amount of money per pupil, £5,000 I think it is, but we don't think that every pupil is going to get that. Early years, you know, is such a vital part of a young person's life. Actually, we know that the experience of the early years for young people has a massive impact on how they then progress going forward. So the Sure Start programme, when it was in, you know, really starting to make inroads into that disadvantage and so on. And I think it's brilliant that, you know, Labour Party is talking about bringing that back, because I think if I would chuck loads of money at early years. I think that is where you could start to see an instant effect and really start to address some of that disadvantage. But we're seeing nursery schools shut down, and again, the money they've offered is nowhere near enough. So they're offering 66 million, and our calculation is that we need 300 million for that sector alone. So those figures are all on the NEU website. You can see that actually it sounds like a lot of money, but really it's not enough. Schools are in deficit. Huge numbers of schools have budget deficits or are likely to go into budget deficits. There is absolutely no slack in the budget. So when you get, who's that man? I can't remember who he is. I'm glad I can't remember who he is. There was a man last year that talked about he was going to go around schools and root out waste like a pig hunting truffles. And I thought, you know, mate, I never called you a pig, right? But you know, the idea that he thinks there's that kind of luxury in our schools just shows such an ignorance about the real situation. So it's a cynical ploy. It's not enough, okay, but our campaign is going to continue, and we're going to get the money we need, because effectively they've agreed with us that there's not enough funding in schools. So now our next battle is to win the funding we need. This country now spends less than 5% of its GDP on education, and that 5% is the recommended kind of minimum, reasonable minimum for a country to spend. I think we're on 4.3%. And you don't need me to tell you that we're the 5th richest economy in the world. So that straight away doesn't sound very right. The lack of proper funding is an absolute disaster for schools. I mean, I don't want to tell you stuff you already know, but we're losing staff, we're losing expertise, it's the support staff that we're losing first of all. But of course, it's not just those individuals losing the jobs, it's the classroom teachers losing that valuable expert support in the classroom, it's those children losing that valuable expert support that they need in the classroom. Increased workload, which is of course leading to people leaving. They just say it's just not worth doing. I have no life, I'm here too late, I'm working over the weekends, and frankly the pay is shocking for what I'm being asked to do. Narrowing of the curriculum, we talked about that. There's all sorts of reasons for the narrowing of the curriculum, but funding is one of the reasons for it, and that's a real problem. The special education needs, the early years and the post-16 are particular kind of areas of risk, I think, where things are going very badly, but we're also seeing buildings crumbling. We're seeing, you know, my school, we've got departments in my school who the kids have to buy their own A4 paper to bring to school, right? Or I was trying to staple something the other day in the staff room. I tried 4 staplers. There were no staples, sorry. But every time I get to staple, it's a tiny little thing, but that's because it isn't somebody's priority to provide staples for the staff room. And it's those kinds of, that's a tiny, tiny example. I don't want you to think, oh, she can't get staples, oh, woe is her, there's not enough money in education funding. But it's an example of how schools are just struggling to resource, to just do ordinary things like staple bits of paper together. The other reason that we're going to carry on this campaign is because it's working. We think we've built a brilliant alliance with other unions, with councillors, with Labour Party CLPs, with activists, with governors, with parents. There's brilliant campaigns springing up all over the place, and we are working together to make this point. The other thing that we are very clear about is this is a campaign that is only going to work if we root it in fighting against austerity, because it's not just a matter of getting more money for schools, it's a matter of getting more money for our community. So like I said, that needs to kind of address the poverty of people's early years, young people's early years, where they are disadvantaged right from the start. 1/3 of our children are living in poverty. 1/3 of our children. Again, we're the 5th richest country in the world. That is rising. That is expected to get far, far worse. And we know that if you are a poor child, you are far less likely to progress well at school. And for all the arguments that schools can transform a child's life, and yes, we hope they can. I wouldn't be in education if I didn't think I could change people's lives, because isn't that what you go into these kind of jobs for? But research shows that only something like between 9 and 13%, sorry, I've not expressed that well, the amount of progress that you can attribute to a school is between 9 and 13%. It's no more than that. Most of the factors that kind of contribute to a child's progress are other socio-economic factors. So yes, we will carry on trying to make that 9 to 13% difference. We will try and make that 9 to 13% bigger. We can't do it without enough money, but we also can't do it in a society in which our young people are at such a disadvantage in the first place. So we are also fighting against the cuts in social services, in welfare services, because we think the whole universal credit system is an absolute abomination. And we know that the support services that schools need, like child and mental health services, youth services, all those support services that the local authority used to provide, schools are now having to do without the money, without the training, without the expertise and without the staff. So we are not a one-issue union, you are not a one-issue party. We understand that actually a child is brought up by the village, and I mean that in the kind of the broadest sense. These are our children, and we have an absolute duty to make sure that they are getting what they need. So 2 things that I think you can do. Get back onto the School Cuts website. It's being updated. I don't know if the figures, they're crunching the figures at the minute, but they're going to have updated figures based on what the Tories have said, and hopefully do the same kind of calculations they did before, school by school. Use that information, because that is really powerful information that the Tories don't want you to use. And if you are a councillor, or you know somebody who's a councillor, please join the NEU Councillors Network, because again, that is a way of bringing together, and I think there's a governors network as well, bringing together people who aren't in the union but have an interest in education to help us try and get more money for our schools. Thank you.